Jung in 1 hour. Fewer quotes, more use. Expect 2 or 3 practical cues. Enjoy.
Carl Gustav Jung believed that a person is larger than the story they tell about themselves. At night, the story cracks. Something older steps forward, the voice that arranges dreams, symbols, and accidents that feel like messages. We pretend it is nonsense because nonsense is safer than wonder. But the images keep returning. They come back when we are tired, when we love someone too much, when we stand at a threshold and don't know why we're afraid. Jung asked a question most people hide from: what kind of truth lives in the unconscious? If the answer is none, then your dreams are only errors in meat and electricity. If the answer is some, then you have to listen. And if the answer is a great deal, then you have to change your life. This is not a highlight reel or museum tour. This is a map with 7 thresholds. Cross them, and you will see why Jung walked away from the most powerful alliance in psychology, why he recorded visions no respectable scholar was supposed to admit, why he claimed there is a center in you that is more you than the you who narrates your day. As you watch, don't try to agree or disagree too quickly. Watch your body's micro-answers. A chill at a line. A memory you didn't invite. A symbol that refuses to be dismissed. The unconscious doesn't clap, it answers. It answers with repetition, with mood, with coincidence that lands like a private joke told by the world itself. We begin at the first threshold, not with theories, but with a boy who felt 2 lives moving inside one skin. If you understand the split in him, you'll understand why he spent the rest of his life making a truce between daylight and depth. You'll also see why this is not just biography. It is an instruction. When the second life in you asks to be heard, what do you do? Jung grew up where the outer world was orderly, church bells, books, rules, and the inner world was not. He felt a double existence, the ordinary schoolboy and a much older presence that seemed to have always been. He later called them personality number 1 and personality number 2. One did homework. The other watched, measured, and listened for currents moving beneath events, as if history were a thin crust over something older and alive. Most children are told that their inner dramas are pretend. Jung discovered that his inner dramas had consequences. A dream could change a day. A day could expose a pattern. And a pattern, once seen, could change a life. He realized that the mind is not a blank room you furnish with ideas, it is a house with doors you didn't know were there. Behind those doors live voices with style and purpose, fear that argues like a lawyer, desire that sings like a hymn, certainty that arrives like weather. When he trained as a physician and then psychiatrist, the consensus told him to treat symptoms as malfunctions. But with patience he noticed something the textbooks could not domesticate: the same shapes appeared across different lives. Anxious merchants dreamed the same falling corridors as grieving mothers. Soldiers met the same trickster logic that mocked their plans. The images wore different costumes, but the roles were eerily stable, as if the psyche had a cast list older than any biography. Jung started keeping 2 ledgers. In the first, the measurable facts of a day, appointments, conversations, the posture people held when they lied to themselves. In the second, what visited, a dream of a house with a new room, an inexplicable calm upon seeing a circle, a stranger's story that resonated beyond its details. He was not collecting trivia. He was testing a premise: if the psyche speaks in symbols, then meaning is not invented, it is encountered. That word, encountered, is the seed of everything that follows. It is different from fantasy, which you direct, and different from analysis, which you control. Encounter means you are approached by something that carries its own energy. It may be personal, a memory with heat still on it. It may be impersonal, a motif that shows up in myths you have never read. Either way, you recognize it by its voltage. It does not ask permission. It asks for honesty. Notice what this implies about suffering. If a symbol chooses you at the sight of pain, the task is not to erase it with positive thinking. The task is to ask what job it's doing. Why the snake? Why the flood? Why the locked room? Jung learned that symbols are not codes to be cracked and discarded. They are bridges between parts of you that rarely meet. When the bridge holds, the symptom sometimes loosens, not because it was wrong, but because it has delivered its message. This approach also reframed morality. If the psyche is structured, then repression is not virtue, it is vandalism. You can suppress what you fear and call it discipline, but the material you exile does not evaporate. It takes the long way home. It returns as projection, as addiction, as sabotage right when you need your best judgment. Jung's childhood sense of two lives, civilized and ancient, became an adult discipline: keep both in view, or one will break the other. There is a cost to this honesty. The cost is that certainty dies. You gain orientation, not control. You begin to notice that the same symbol can save one person and deceive another. You realize that you cannot outsource your conscience to a slogan or your destiny to a trend. You have to grow a listening that is stern and tender at once. Stern enough to say no to glamour. Tender enough to admit what hurts without turning it into a performance. Why should any of this matter to you? Because the split Jung felt is not rare. It is modern life. One part of you manages calendars, bills, and carefully curated opinions. The other part knows when the air in a room changes for reasons you can't explain. One part insists on explanations that fit into small boxes. The other has seen you do things you swore you would never do, precisely because a symbol was moving you from below your reasons. Threshold eyes passed when you agree to keep both ledgers. Write the day as it is, and record what visits, exactly as it arrives, without polishing, without apologizing. Treat the images with hospitality, not worship. Ask them what they want, and be willing for the answer to demand something of you. This is the beginning of Jung's psychology, not a technique, but a posture. A respectful, almost scientific willingness to be surprised by what is most deeply yours. If you can stand in that posture, one eye on the world, one eye on the depth, you are ready for the second threshold, where friendship and doctrine collide, and the cost of honesty becomes public. Friendship can feel like fate when two people discover the same door in reality. When Jung met Freud, it was like that, recognition with voltage. They spoke for hours the first time, not because they agreed on everything, but because each felt the other had seen into the forbidden basement of the mind. For a while, they became a two-man expedition. Freud offered a ruthless grammar for the hidden life. Jung offered range, a sense that the basement had more rooms than anyone suspected. Freud gave Jung a language and a lineage. He placed Jung forward as the heir apparent, the future of psychoanalysis. This was more than a compliment. It was an invitation into a family with doctrines instead of dinner rules. A bond like that carries love and danger. If you accept the seat, you inherit the table. If you touch the table, you may be told you are betraying the family. Freud's engine was clarity purchased at a cost, the unconscious as a cauldron of repressed wishes, the sexual drive as a master key, dreams as wish fulfillments wearing costumes. The model had steel in it. It turned chaos into law. It also narrowed the sky. Jung could work inside that room for only so long before the walls began to breathe. Jung's patients and his own dreams did not behave like criminals in disguise. They behaved like playwrights, priests, and pranksters. A snake was not just a displaced body part, it could be an ancient sign for renewal. A flood did not merely hide an impulse, it could be the psyche's way to reset a corrupt order. Jung's heresy was simple to state and hard to accept. Symbols are not only veils for suppressed drives, they are transformations of psychic energy into form. Libido, for Jung, was not just sexual, it was the fuel of the whole inner economy, capable of becoming art, faith, obsession, science, or love. He wrote a book to test that claim, first called Psychology of the Unconscious, tracking how a single life borrows mythic shapes it never consciously learned. The argument was not an attack on Freud but an expansion. The psyche uses the oldest stories it can find because those stories carry load-bearing meanings. For Freud, this sounded like surrender to mysticism, a dilution of the hard medicine psychoanalysis was trying to administer to a sentimental age. Beneath the theory, another drama unfolded, the oldest one, father and son. Freud had spent years carving a discipline out of resistance and ridicule. He needed loyalty because his movement was still fragile. Jung had spent his life listening to what knocks at the door when loyalty becomes idolatry. He needed latitude because the visitors in his inner life refused to salute any single flag. The letters between them slowly revealed the fault line. Is the unconscious primarily a vault of repressed sexuality, or is it a cosmos structured by forms older than any individual? They argued like men who still hoped to stay together. They also set traps for one another. Freud warned Jung that abandoning the sexual theory would mean abandoning science itself. Jung warned Freud that reducing symbols to one explanation would make analysis blind to the very meanings that heal. When love for truth threatens a relationship, truth starts to take on the tone of betrayal. Remember, this was not a petty personality clash. It was a metaphysical disagreement about what a human being is. If the unconscious is a vault, analysis is locksmithing. If the unconscious is a cosmos, analysis is navigation. Vaults are opened by a single combination. Cosmoses are crossed with a map and weather sense. Jung could not pretend the stars were a padlock. There was also this: Freud distrusted anything that smelled like religion because he had seen the damage of dogma. Jung distrusted anything that smelled like reduction because he had seen patients crushed by explanations that were tidy and wrong. They were both guarding against tyranny, Freud against superstition masquerading as truth, Jung against explanation masquerading as understanding. The split did not happen in one explosion, it happened as a series of controlled demolitions. Titles were relinquished. Invitations stopped arriving. Conversations that had once been urgent now took days to answer and then stopped. The movement kept the man who demanded one master key. The outlier kept the question that required many. Here is the risk when a friendship becomes a doctrine: love turns into leverage. If you disagree, you are not just mistaken, you are disloyal. Jung felt the pressure of that logic and chose its cost. He stepped away from the center of a young empire to stand alone with a hypothesis that the psyche is autonomous and symbolic, and that the path to health runs through a dialogue with what visits, not a conquest of what embarrasses. Solitude is expensive. The day after you keep your integrity, your calendar is empty. Jung paid with title and reputation, and then with something harder to measure: confidence. When you declare independence from a house that fed you, the wind is loud. He began to dream in a new key. He recorded images with formal respect, as if each could be a witness. Figures with names appeared. Some spoke like teachers, some like temptations, some like mirrors. He did not publish these visions at once, because the point was not to stun an audience. The point was to let the images say what they were going to say. Before the solitude deepened, Jung tried one more time to argue from results. He pointed to patients who changed when a symbol was honored rather than decoded and dismissed. He pointed to cases where the narrowest sexual reading failed but a mythic frame allowed a life to reorganize. Freud pointed to the danger of inflation, of letting grand symbols justify grandiose selves. Both were right about their warnings. But only one was willing to risk being called a mystic to protect the soul's complexity. If you have ever left a prestigious room to keep a promise you made to yourself, you know this terrain. The first week feels like freedom. The second feels like a mistake. Friends correct you in disappointed tones. Your own mind tries to bargain. Perhaps you can keep the language and smuggle in your meanings. Jung tried that. It did not hold. The psyche he served kept demanding its full breadth, not a compromised version that would pass inspection. Notice what happens to a theory when it becomes a survival strategy. It stops describing reality and starts protecting a tribe. Freud had reason to protect what he built, Jung had reason to resist a protection that cost him truth. The tragedy is that both men were necessary, one to hammer a disciplined method into being, the other to keep the method from shrinking the world. The second threshold is crossed here. Jung leaves the movement to keep the question. He refuses a single, totalizing explanation in favor of a living conversation with the unconscious. He is not falling into gullibility. He is refusing to be bullied by clarity that comes too cheaply. He walks out of the council chamber and into weather. He would rather be rained on than breathe air that has stopped moving. Do not romanticize this courage. It leads directly to the confrontation that nearly breaks him. The moment you give the unconscious full citizenship, it will use its vote. Images do not wait for your schedule. They arrive with their own calendar and their own tone. Jung is about to face that avalanche, the great descent that fills a crimson book and reorganizes his life. But that is the next threshold. For now, take the lesson this split offers. Beware of explanations that punish dissent, even when they wear the clothes of science. Beware of symbols that ask for worship instead of work. Hold both warnings. Let them argue in you. Somewhere between reduction and inflation is a way of seeing that neither flatters nor lies. That is the path Jung chose when he broke with Freud, a path that will drag him into the deepest rooms of the psyche, and then, slowly, toward a center that can bear the weight of a life. When you leave a great house, the silence follows you home. After the split with Freud, Jung did not return to normal life. He entered a weather system. He began to dream in symbols that refused to be polite. In waking hours, he felt images gathering just outside the fence of attention, pressing, rehearsing, waiting for a door to open. He did something most of us never risk. He opened the door on purpose. Jung called the method active imagination. He would sit, lower the noise of his ordinary mind, and invite the next image to step forward. Not to chase it, not to script it, but to treat it as a guest with a name. "What are you?" he would ask. "What do you want?" And then he wrote down what came, with the same seriousness that a scientist records a measurement. He was not play acting. He was conducting a disciplined experiment in the first person. The figures arrived. They did not behave like metaphors, they behaved like people. A blind prophet with a girl who could see. A traveler from older deserts. A winged old man who would later be called Philemon. They brought opinions, warnings, and sometimes insults. They proposed bargains. They taught him in tones that were not his own. He had trained his whole life to listen for patterns in others. Now he had to listen for patterns in himself and admit that his self was a parliament, not a monarch. To outsiders, this looks like the brink of madness. Jung knew the risk. He was a physician who had treated psychosis. He knew the feel of a mind unmoored. He put guardrails in place. He did this work in limited doses. He kept his clinical practice. He tracked his mood, his sleep, his capacity to love and to work. If any of those collapsed, the experiment would stop. But something else happened. The deeper he went, the more his outer life gained a kind of clean, steady force. He was not dissolving. He was differentiating, learning to recognize which inner voice was a teacher and which was a tyrant in costume. He wrote and painted what he found in a crimson volume he called the Red Book. The pages are careful, almost ceremonial, ornamented capitals, mandalas, scenes painted with the patience of a monk who knows attention is a moral act. Why the formality? Because reverence changes the kind of answers you receive. If you come to the psyche with a net, it gives you fish. If you come with a lit candle, it might give you a temple. What was learned there? First, that the psyche is autonomous. You cannot threaten it into silence or flatter it into cooperation. It has its own weather, its own migrations, its own language of image and rhythm. Second, that the images have jobs. They are not decorations. A serpent might arrive as renewal disguised as danger. A descent into caves might be the mind's way of placing you below the noise so you can hear the older machinery of meaning. A queen or a beggar might be an argument about pride, about poverty of soul, about where real authority sits. Third, that you can speak back. Active imagination is not passive surrender, it is dialogue with consequences. Jung learned to ask for clarification, to press when flattery arrived, to refuse bargains that cost his integrity. A true figure gains coherence under pressure. A false one shrinks when you ask what work it intends to do in the world. This is how he safeguarded against inflation, the grandiose confusion that confuses a borrowed halo with genuine transformation. The test was simple. Does the image help you carry life more honestly? If not, it's theater. Sometimes the dialogues were tender. A presence would remind him of humility or of the need to honor love that does not resemble his ideal. Sometimes they were terrible. He saw rivers of blood before the world saw war on a scale it had never known. He wrestled with the temptation to read every coincidence as a commandment. He learned restraint. Symbols need engagement, not superstition. He wrote this discipline into his practice: listen, test, integrate, and only then speak. People imagine that such visions produce constant drama. The truth is more domestic. Much of Jung's descent taught him to make ordinary days sacramental, to notice which conversations left him more real and which left him cleverly false, to keep faith with small routines that protected the integration he was attempting. He still ate, worked, argued, loved, and walked the lake. The point was not to live in images, but to let the images inform the living. Why keep the book private for so long? Because it was an inner laboratory notebook, not a manifesto. He did not want admirers of his visions, he wanted students of their own. Publishing the book too early would have fed the very inflation he warned against, disciples copying his symbols instead of discovering their own. So he distilled the insights into a psychology others could test: the reality of archetypes, the process of individuation, the function of symbol, the warning about the shadow's clever disguises. The red book was the furnace, the later work was the metal cooled and shaped. If you try any form of active imagination yourself, you will meet the first obstacle quickly: self-consciousness. You will feel silly. You will try to steer the scene so it says what you already believe. That is normal. Stay a little longer. Admit your fear of being gullible and your equal fear of being so rational that you can no longer hear your own life speaking. Then make a small promise: for 10 minutes, I will not perform. I will write down what comes without apologizing for its style. I will test meanings later. Right now, I will record faithfully. A second obstacle: moral confusion. What if a figure tells you something that contradicts your values? Jung's answer was not obey or ignore. It was interrogate. Ask who benefits. Ask what happens if you take the suggestion literally versus symbolically. Ask what part of you is thrilled by this advice and what part sickens. The psyche will sometimes propose shortcuts to power, love, or vindication. The right response is not panic, it is adulthood. Thank the figure for its clarity, and then refuse what would make you smaller. A third obstacle: impatience. We want breakthroughs on a schedule. We want one grand image to reorder the whole life. Jung learned that the psyche does not work on broadcast, it works on migration. An image will circle and return, each time bringing a new angle, a new demand. If you chase novelty, you will miss the slow construction of a symbol that becomes a bridge you can actually walk on. What did Philemon teach him? Among other things, proportion. That wisdom is not the same as certainty. That the mind can be precise without being narrow. That humility is not self-hatred, it is alignment with something that measures more than personal preference. Philemon became a guide not because he flattered Jung, but because he corrected him. That is how you know you are not in the grip of a fantasy, you are being asked to grow somewhere you would rather stay the same. And yet Jung never turned these figures into gods. He kept a human life, messy, responsible, bound to the fate of other people. He let the images inform his ethics rather than replace them. He knew the seduction of being special, of having secret knowledge. He saw what that does to therapists and to patients. So he insisted on work. If a symbol is real, it will change how you show up for the next hard conversation, the next promise you'd like to break, the next moment you could choose kindness or perform cruelty. Here is the central claim of this threshold: the unconscious is not a landfill or a magic trick. It is a landscape with citizens. If you grant them dignity, neither worshiping nor abusing them, they will teach you how to carry the weight of being a person. They will also expose every shortcut you hope to take. That exposure is not punishment. It is the price of wholeness. When Jung finally looked up from the red pages, he did not have a cult to found, he had a vocabulary to offer. Archetype, shadow, anima and animus, individuation, synchronicity, the self. None of these were born as slogans. They were born as answers to questions asked under pressure, in a room where he sat across from what he could not control and learned to love it enough to argue with it. The third threshold ends where a map begins. Out of the dialogues came patterns, recurring roles that shape dreams and histories alike. The next part of our journey names them. Not to trap the psyche in definitions, but to give you handles for what you have met 100 times without language. We will speak of the shadow that hides in your best intentions, the lover that tries to save you with union, the trickster that breaks what was getting smug, the wise old man who arrives when you stop pretending not to know. When you are ready, we will cross into that country where private suffering meets ancient forms, and we will see how naming the pattern does not shrink your life. It enlarges it. Patterns repeat. Across strangers, languages, centuries, the same shapes walk through different rooms. A soldier has a dream of a fox who talks in riddles. A mathematician meets a woman in blue who says a single decisive sentence. A child draws the same spiral for 3 weeks and then stops the day her father returns. None of them compare notes, yet the motifs rhyme. Jung called these recurring shapes archetypes. Not pictures, but forms, organizing tendencies that shape how images gather, how stories move, how energy takes a role. They don't dictate the content of your life, they lend it a skeleton. Think of them as the grammar of the psyche. Cultures speak in different tongues. Archetypes are the shared syntax that lets a sentence be a sentence at all. Start with the persona, the mask built to face the world. It is not a lie, it is a tool. You need a persona the way a diver needs a suit. But if you mistake the suit for skin, you drown the moment a new depth asks more of you. Opposite the persona stands the shadow, everything you exile because it threatens the mask. This is not a trash heap of badness. It holds undeveloped strength, unlived tenderness, ferocity that ought to become courage. The shadow is not ashamed of you, it wants a job. Then anima and animus, the inner contrasexual images, bridges to qualities you have underused or misunderstood. They can inspire love or possession, vision or delusion. When immature, they seduce you with absolutes. She is salvation, he is doom. Matured, they become mediators to soul, sources of relatedness, imagination, and judgment not bound by your favorite excuses. The trickster breaks what has become smug. He unties knots by reversing the rules. He arrives as glitch, prank, paradox, sometimes as your own sarcasm when it starts aiming at your falsehoods instead of other people's. Trickster energy humiliates the ego to save the person. It is a dangerous mercy. The hero carries the burden that would crush everyone else, not because he's special, but because someone has to move first. He takes wounds meant to teach. His danger is inflation, confusing the quest with his identity. When he forgets to come home or to bow before wisdom older than courage, he becomes a tyrant in training. The wise old man or wise woman appears when your theatrics are exhausted, often in dreams, sometimes in the steady voice of a friend who doesn't need you to be impressive. The great mother wears 2 faces, nourishing and devouring. She grows you and, if unappeased, she swallows you, into dependency, into regression, into the warm dark that hates your edges. The child archetype is new life insisting on a future. It asks you to protect possibilities your adult boredom has already sentenced. Behind and beyond these is the self, not the ego improved, but the center that includes and exceeds you. It shows itself as mandala, as a house with rooms you keep discovering, as a still point around which conflict reorders without vanishing. When the self is near, opposites begin to speak to one another. Jung's claim was blunt: these forms are not invented by culture, culture discovers them. When a myth survives, it is because it carries voltage human biographies cannot manufacture on demand. When an image returns across epochs, it is because it solves a problem faces alone cannot solve. This is why dreams feel both intimate and ancient, your private pain wearing an old, well-fitting coat. How do archetypes operate? By possession and by pattern. Possession is when an archetypal mood seizes you and shrinks the world to a single logic. Suddenly everything is a test of dominance, the hero possessed, or everything is a seduction, the anima/animus possessed, or everything is a joke that proves nothing is real, the trickster possessed. pattern is gentler, a recurring role that asks for acknowledgement. If you can name the pattern, the possession loosens. Names are handles. Handles let you set things down. The collective unconscious is the field in which these forms live, collective not because it belongs to a committee, but because it is shared by the species. It is not mysticism for its own sake. It is a sober inference. The same motifs arise in people with no contact, carrying similar functions. The psyche appears to come equipped with a template library, call it a deep memory, that recruits local images to do timeless work. Here is a practical rule: form before story. When a dream confuses you, set aside the plot and find the role. Who is hiding? Who guides? What sabotages with laughter? What demands union at any price? Identify the archetypal job being done. Then bring the story back and ask, how has my life been cast in this role without my consent? Another rule: emotion is a compass. Archetypes carry distinct emotional signatures. Shadow comes with heat and shame, sometimes with a secret excitement that tells you there's gold mixed in the dirt. Persona comes with stiffness and performance fatigue. Trickster carries bright cruelty that can turn playful if you let go of control. The self arrives like a hush in a noisy room. Learn the signatures, you will catch the roles sooner. Archetypes are not excuses, they are orientations. To say that was my shadow is not to be acquitted, it's to be assigned work. A name without labor is superstition. Archetypal language earns its keep only if it changes what you do next, what apology you make, what boundary you set, what practice you keep when motivation is gone. Complexes, charged clusters around personal wounds, borrow power from archetypes. That is why they feel bigger than biography. Your fathers neglect couples with the archetypal father, and suddenly every authority figure is a cosmic tribunal. Your first love's betrayal fuses with the lover, and now intimacy is a sacrament or a scam, nothing in between. Untangling a complex means separating the personal thread from the archetypal rope, and then learning to use the rope rather than hang from it. Beware two equal dangers: reduction and inflation. Reduction says, all this is just sex, or just power, or just chemicals. It keeps you safe by keeping you small. Inflation says, all this proves I am chosen. It keeps you high by keeping you hollow. Jung's middle path is stern: name the pattern, test it against reality, and convert it into responsibility. How do you work with archetypes? Slowly, locally, with respect. Begin with observation. Write down dreams for 2 weeks without interpretation. Circle recurring images. Ask simple questions. Where does the energy rise? Where does it drain? Next, conversation. In active imagination, let one figure speak, answer briefly, record faithfully. Then discrimination. Does this image help me carry life more honestly? If yes, integrate, make a change you can verify. If no, return it to the psyche with thanks and affirm no. Collect myths the way earlier generations collected tools. Notice which story holds you when your biography runs out of cleverness. If Odysseus steadies you, you are learning the art of returning. If Psyche and Eros steadies you, you are learning to trust love through tasks that purify perception. If Trickster steadies you, you are learning to laugh your ego out of a corner it cannot fight its way out of. The myth is not a cage, it's a scaffold. You take it down when the structure stands. Do archetypes exist? The question is less useful than it sounds. They act. They organize attention. They bend coincidence toward meaning. They recruit memory and fantasy into shapes that either crush you or carry you. In practice, that is existence enough. When a pattern can ruin your week or save your marriage depending on whether you recognize it, you treat it as real. And the proof? People change when the right pattern is named at the right time with the right demand. A man stops performing piety and starts telling the truth because he realizes his persona has been masquerading as conscience. A woman stops trying to merge with saviors because she recognizes the anima's glamour and chooses relatedness over rescue. A leader stops reenacting the tyrant father he despised because he can feel the hero sliding toward empire and steps back before the crown fuses to his skull. If you're looking for a test that keeps you honest, Try this triad: image, feeling, action. When a pattern names you, the image clarifies, the feeling deepens without hysteria, and a concrete action suggests itself that costs something and gives something. If all you have is image and feeling, you are high. If all you have is action without image or feeling, you are numb. If all three align, the psyche is cooperating. One more caution: archetypal language spreads fast because it flatters intelligence. It can become a new persona, clever labels hiding old fear. Let your vocabulary be smaller than your obedience to the next right thing. The point is not to collect names, it's to become a person who can host more of reality without lying. When Jung wrote about archetypes and the collective unconscious, he was not building a museum. He was mapping a living city and handing you a street guide. Some districts you will avoid for a while, some will feel like home. As you learn the map, your private crises stop feeling like freak weather. You can see the season, prepare for it, even find beauty in it. From here, the path turns from naming to negotiation. Knowing the shadow exists is not the same as meeting it without flinching. Knowing the self is real is not the same as letting your life pivot around it. The next threshold is individuation, not self-improvement, but the slow, exact marriage of what you know with what knows you. Individuation is not self-improvement, it is a treaty. Not a treaty with your best self, but with the parts of you that have been surviving without your permission. It begins the moment you stop negotiating with your image and start negotiating with your life. Jung's word individuation means this: the gradual alignment of consciousness with the truth of the unconscious. Alignment, not conquest. You do not annex the depths like a victorious empire. You make room for citizens you've exiled, needs, talents, fears, and memories that have been doing your living from the basement. The first negotiation is with the shadow. Everyone has one. The shadow is not a villain living in a cave, it is the sum of what you disown. The disowned does not vanish. It hires itself out to coincidences and impersonates other people so that you can hate it safely at a distance. The most efficient way to avoid your shadow is to build a persona that looks morally excellent. The most efficient way to meet your shadow is to get honest about resentment, envy, contempt, and the thrill you feel when someone finally gets what they deserve. The shadow contains more than vice. It also holds unlived virtues: courage you called anger, ambition you called arrogance in others, erratic force you called danger, tenderness you called weakness. Anything you could not claim without risking belonging slid into the dark and learned to speak through strangers. That is why your enemies seem telepathic. They keep doing your lines for you. How do you meet it without being eaten? Start with behavior, not theory. Write down 3 recurring conflicts in your life: work, love, family. For each, make 2 columns. In the left, the story you tell. In the right, a list of facts that embarrass the story, what you did, delayed, enjoyed, or secretly wanted. Read the right column aloud. If you feel heat in the face, you have contacted live material. Do not turn it into shame. Turn it into work. What power is here that I have been using sideways? Projection is the shadow's favorite courier. You will recognize it by excess. Ordinary disappointment swells into moral verdict. A stranger's habit feels like a personal attack. A leader's flaw becomes your apocalypse. When the intensity is larger than the situation, pause. Ask, what part of me is on stage without my consent? Name it softly. Thank it for trying to protect you. Then call it back. That callback is the first muscle of individuation. A second muscle, paradox literacy. The psyche grows by holding opposites until a third thing is born. Strength without tenderness becomes cruelty. Tenderness without strength becomes enablement. Discipline without joy becomes resentment. Joy without discipline becomes waste. Individuation does not choose sides. It builds a center that can host the argument without collapsing into one pole. There is a moment in every honest life when you realize your virtues have been doubling as hiding places. Humility covered fear. Loyalty covered inertia. Independence covered the refusal to ask for help. The shadow is not impressed by your explanations. It is waiting for your confession. Not a theatrical confession to the crowd, but the private one where you say the unsayable sentence that unlocks a room. I am afraid of being ordinary. I want power more than I want love. I sabotage peace because chaos makes me feel alive. When the sentence is true, your body will tell you. The room you've been circling will open. Now what? Jung's answer is stern and practical. Structure the truth. If the shadow carries misused courage, assign it a job that costs something. Have the hard conversation you've delayed for a year. If it carries misused eros, stop sprinkling flirtation over every wound and choose one container where desire can be honest and honorable. If it carries misused ambition, stop heckling from the cheap seats and build the thing you keep criticizing in others. Beware the two counterfeit answers, reduction and inflation. Reduction says, it's just trauma chemicals. That may be partly true and still too small. Inflation says, I've met my shadow, therefore I am deep. That may be poetic and still a lie. The test is behavioral. If your apologies get shorter and truer, if your boundaries become both kinder and firmer, if your taste for gossip dies, individuation is underway. If you are collecting archetypal vocabulary to avoid changing, you are decorating the persona. There is a fear that keeps many from this path. If I let the shadow in, won't it take over? Only if you offer it worship instead of work. The psyche respects contracts. When you give a force a task and hold it accountable, it civilizes. When you hide it and then expect sainthood, it will pick the lock and drive at night. Better to give it a shift and check its work than to wake up in wreckage you pretend is fate. Individuation will ask you to revisit love. Not the sentiment, the practice. The people who knew you only by your persona will not applaud when you begin to live from a deeper center. Some will leave, some will attack, a few will quietly adjust and love you better. Do not punish those who cannot follow. Do not romanticize those who can. Measure relationships by their capacity to tolerate your integration and to ask you for theirs. The shadow also lives in groups. A movement that prides itself on purity will soon require scapegoats. A family that worships loyalty will crucify truth-tellers. A company that brands itself as disruptive will quietly exile anyone who disrupts its inner hypocrisy. If you are individuating, you will notice these patterns sooner. You will also feel lonelier for a time, because clarity shrinks some rooms. Stay the course. The rooms that remain will be worth breathing in. Jung insisted on one more safeguard, symbolic work. Keep the dream journal even when it bores you. Sketch the image that keeps returning even when it embarrasses you. Ask the figure in active imagination what job it is doing for you, then test the answer with a small act in daylight. Symbol without action is intoxication. Action without symbol is amnesia. Together they build memory your future self can stand on. What does progress feel like? Not bliss. Not certainty. Rather a deeper okayness under pressure, a sense that you are not negotiating with reality as much. The same insults land, but do not govern. The same temptations arrive, but you see the price tag early. You begin to choose work that enlarges you over applause that starves you. You speak in sentences that do not require choreography to hide their cost. Sometimes individuation looks like failure. You will quit a flattering role, end a romance that depends on your self-betrayal, or decline a crown that would turn you into the thing you critique. From the outside, it will look like loss of momentum. From the inside, you will feel the axis form, a subtle alignment around which you can finally turn without making yourself sick. And the shadow? It will never be finished with you. That is not bad news. It means you will never run out of material for honesty. Each new stage of life throws a fresh bundle into the dark, powers you have not yet learned to carry. The work repeats: notice, name, negotiate, assign, integrate. Less drama over time. More gravity. Fewer speeches. Cleaner promises. Individuation is not an escape from the world, it is an apprenticeship for it. You become someone whose presence steadies rooms rather than excites them into panic or performance. You become difficult to flatter and difficult to scandalize. You stop needing enemies to feel alive. You can love without swallowing and lead without pretending to be a god. That is the fifth threshold, the slow, unspectacular heroism of becoming a person who can host more of reality without lying. From here, the road turns toward the world again, toward the symbols that bridge inner and outer, and the strange alignments Jung called synchronicity. But before we cross, take stock. What truth have you been avoiding because it would cost you a role? Write it. Do something small that honors it. Then meet me at the sixth threshold, where meaning stops being an idea and starts interfering with coincidence. A sign tells you where to turn. A symbol tells you what is turning you. Signs are agreements, arrows, labels, passwords. They can be replaced without loss. Symbols are alive. They grow out of pressure points in a life the way scar tissue grows where the skin tore. A true symbol is not chosen for cleverness, it chooses you for necessity. Jung learned to treat symbols as bridges between levels of the psyche that don't usually speak. A bridge is not a painting to admire, it is a structure to cross. If an image keeps returning, a black dog at the threshold, a locked room, a river that overflows, ask what traffic it is trying to carry. From where to where? From grief to courage? From pride to proportion? From isolation to relation? The question matters more than the label. A symbol is not a code to be cracked and discarded. When you decode a symbol and throw it away, you lose the very instrument that could keep your life connected under stress. Reduction turns bridges into trivia. Inflation turns bridges into altars. Both miss the point. The right stance is use, walk it, check its weight, reinforce it with action. Myth is the city where symbols go to work in public. It is the communal dream, the place where individual dramas reveal their architecture. When a myth grips you, it is because it carries voltage your private story can't supply alone. Odysseus survives because home is worth more than glamour. Psyche completes tasks because love needs perception, not projection. Trickster breaks proud machines so that life can move again. These are not distant entertainments, they are maps smuggled through time. How do you discern a living symbol from a passing image? By its behavior in you. First, return. It comes back across contexts you didn't plan. Second, compression. It holds more meaning the longer you sit with it, depth, not just novelty. Third, consequence. It proposes a change that costs you something and gives you something. If an image demands worship, secrecy, and specialness, be suspicious. If it asks for a small, honest act you can verify, it is likely doing real work. Now the scandal Jung named synchronicity, meaningful coincidence without a visible chain of cause. Skeptics call it pattern hunger, zealots turn it into omens. Jung stood between those cliffs. He noticed that inner states and outer events sometimes rhyme so precisely that chance becomes an evasion. The purpose is not fortune-telling, it is orientation. When psyche and world line up, your task is modest. Confirm the meaning with work, not with crowns. Consider the scarab story. A patient dreamt of a golden scarab, symbol of rebirth. As she recounted it, a beetle tapped against Jung's window. He caught it and placed it in her hand. The timing punctured her defended rationalism. The point was not magic, it was breakthrough. Her life loosened where it had been locked. That is synchronicity's signature, not spectacle, but shift. How do you work with this without drowning in apophenia, seeing faces in every cloud? Use a threefold test: meaning, timing, transformation. Meaning, does the event resonate specifically with an inner process alive right now, not just vaguely with a mood you always have? Timing, does it arrive at the moment a decision, confession, or surrender is on the table? Transformation, after honoring it with one concrete act, does your life clarify rather than blur? If all you get is goosebumps, let it pass. Practice that keeps you honest. Keep a 2-week dream ledger. No interpretations yet. Circle recurring figures and places. Note emotional temperature for each. Choose one symbol only. Not 10. 1. Ask what job it might be trying to do. Write 3 hypotheses in plain language. Active imagination, brief and bounded. 10 minutes. Invite the figure, ask 2 questions, thank it, stop. Record exactly, without polishing. Translate symbol to daylight. Design a small act that embodies the guest meaning, an apology made, a boundary set, a conversation scheduled, a habit retired. Evaluate. Did the act reduce static? Did it make the next right step obvious rather than theatrical? If yes, the bridge is bearing weight. If no, stand down. Not every image wants a cathedral. There are two equal dangers here. Cynicism amputates meaning to avoid embarrassment. Life shrinks into procedures and ironic distance. Superstition inflates meaning to avoid responsibility. Life swells into paranoia and special missions. Jung's path is sterner. Meaning is earned by coherence over time and verified by behavior. Hold your images like hypotheses, strong enough to test, light enough to revise. A symbol that is working will change your appetites. The gossip you once relished begins to taste like ash. The flattery that used to hook you becomes embarrassing. The old adrenaline of sabotage loses its charm. You do not become a saint, you become someone who can feel the price tag earlier and pay it on purpose when it is worth paying. What about collective symbols, flags, slogans, sacred objects? They carry power because they tap the species-level patterns. But power is not virtue. Groups use symbols to bind, to bless, to blind. Individuation lets you see when a banner is asking for service your soul cannot give. The test is, again, behavioral. Does loyalty to this symbol make you more real and more responsible, or more theatrical and more obedient? If a symbol cannot tolerate questions, it is not sacred, it is brittle. Another safeguard, proportion. Let your symbols reorganize your life locally before you announce revelations globally. Repair one relationship. Clean one habit. Finish one promise that would have impressed your past self. When a symbol survives housekeeping, it has earned a pulpit. If it withers under dust and dishes, you were chasing aura. You will be tempted to collect symbols like rare coins. Resist. Depth is not built by owning many, it is built by serving a few. If a single recurring image stays with you for a year and teaches you patience, courage, and restraint, it has done more than a library of visions that leave no fingerprints on your days. Occasionally, synchronicity will feel like a hand on your shoulder. A book falls open to the line you needed, an old friend calls the hour you decided to confess, the job offer arrives 2 days after you finally say the thing you have avoided for years. Take the hint, but earn it. Let the action be small, precise, and accountable. Meaning that cannot survive accountability is theater. So what is the fruit of all this? Not a life without confusion, but a life where confusion no longer rules. You carry a few good symbols like tools on a belt. You know which myth steadies you when panic climbs, which image reminds you to stay human when victory tempts arrogance. You become porous in the right places, firm in the right places. Your yes belongs to you again. At this threshold, we have learned to listen and to answer. The bridge stands. The city of myth has been walked with respect. Coincidence has been welcomed without worship. What waits beyond is not another image, but a different center of gravity, the self, a wholeness that includes you and exceeds you. Not perfection, not performance, orientation. When we cross, conflicts won't vanish, they will take their seats around a table that finally holds. When you are ready, we will enter that last room. The door is playing. The room is quiet. What changes is the axis around which your life can turn. You can organize a life around speed, praise, or fear. None of those hold under pressure. Jung found another center, something he called the self, a whole that includes you and exceeds you. You don't manufacture it, you discover it the way a traveler discovers a spring after walking through heat. The sign is not ecstasy. The sign is orientation. Think of the self as center and circumference at once. A still point around which conflict reorganizes, a wider circle that makes room for things you used to exile. When it is near, opposites begin to speak to each other without demanding victory. Strength finds tenderness without apology. Discipline keeps company with joy. Your life stops being a campaign and starts being a conversation that holds. Jung intuited this long before he named it. He dreamed of a house with many levels, cellar, ground floor, older foundations, and felt, with awe and unease, I am this house. Later, at Bollingen, he stacked stones into a tower and carved signs into them, not to decorate a retreat but to externalize an inner geometry. Circles within squares. Crossroads in stone. The Latin sentence he loved, vocatus ad non vocatus Deus aderit, called or not called, the God will be present, was not a slogan, it was logistics. The depth arrives on its own schedule. Your task is to be someone it can safely visit. What, then, is the self in practice? Not an idea. A pattern of effects. Old resentments lose their veto. Your taste for performance shrinks. Boundaries become cleaner and kinder. The same temptations arrive, but you see their invoice earlier and pay only when the price is honest. Decisions stop being coin flips between two lies. You can feel a third thing forming, something truer than either pole. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to birth a reconciling symbol out of sustained tension. Here is the first safeguard: the self is not your ego on a throne. Inflation begins with a mood, I am chosen, and ends with damage. Relation to the self is obedience, not possession. You don't say, I am the self. You say, I will align. The test is brutal and simple. People close to you suffer less from your specialness and more from your reliability. If the numinous turns you into a tyrant, you've crowned a complex, not met the self. Second safeguard, work before witness. A real center gives you ordinary assignments. Repair a promise. Return a book. Apologize without biography. Publish the work you keep polishing to postpone shame. The self is allergic to theater. If your revelation can't survive chores, it isn't revelation, it's brand. Third safeguard, proportion. Wholeness is not maximalism. It is right size. When the self is near, scale becomes accurate. You stop volunteering for crusades that secretly feed your emptiness. You stop shrinking from tasks that quietly belong to you. You can say yes without drama and no without cruelty. How do you move toward it without faking it? Begin with circumambulation, to circle something you cannot yet enter. Keep both ledgers, outer facts and what visits. Walk the perimeter each day with one honest question: what did I avoid that has to be faced? What did I face that can now be integrated? The point is not to force arrival, it is to make a path the center can choose to walk. A practical triad to keep you honest: axis, limits, service. Axis, one practice that keeps your spine straight: writing at dawn, a walk at the lake, 10 minutes of active imagination bounded by a timer. Limits, the ceiling on your appetites, how much scroll, sugar, rage, or applause you allow before clarity degrades. Name your numbers. Keep them. Service, one act done for the world that does not advertise you. The self prefers offerings that don't trend. What does conversation with the self feel like? Not possession, permission. A hush under noise. A clean yes that does not need a speech. A refusal that doesn't require a villain. Sometimes it arrives as mandala, a centering image that steadies the hands that hold your day. Sometimes as a new room in the house, unexpected capacity that doesn't come with swagger. Sometimes as stone, a decision that sits and stays. There will be counterfeits. Grand images that flatter your biography. Sacred urgencies that skip accountability. Communities that sell wholeness as belonging to a club. Remember the rule from the previous threshold: image, feeling, action. Here the action is quiet and cumulative, small fidelities done on schedule. If your newfound center cannot keep a calendar, it is not a center. Jung's ethics grew out of this gravity. He did not preach perfection, he practiced proportion. He argued, loved, wrote, misstepped, corrected. He distrusted any spirituality that floated above consequence. The self, properly related to, sends you back to specific people and specific tasks with specific costs. You are not rescued from life, you are returned to it with better weight distribution. What about suffering? The self does not end it, it re-aims it. Pain stops being a moral verdict and becomes raw material. You can choose how to carry it, alone as identity or together as responsibility. The first hard thing this center asks is often relinquishment of a role that fed your persona, of a war that fed your shadow, of a romance with your own potential that kept you from doing today's work. Letting go feels like loss until the freed attention begins to build. Here is a compact practice, call it the Bollingen test. When a decision knifes you in two, write it on paper and put the paper under a small stone. Ask, if this choice were carved, could I live with it when the weather turns? The self doesn't chase novelty, it chooses what will still be true when the lake is frozen. If the answer is vague adrenaline, wait. If the answer is quiet, heavy, strangely relieving, move. Collect 4 virtues that counter your 4 favorite vices. Jung loved a quaternity for good reason. If rage is your shortcut to aliveness, pair it with patience. If charm is your mask, pair it with plain speech. If certainty is your drug, pair it with curiosity. If withdrawal is your fortress, pair it with one dependable invitation each week. Draw them as a simple cross inside a circle. It's not art, it's a dashboard. What changes in love? Projection thins. The other person stops being a screen for your unlived life and becomes a citizen with their own center. You stop saving as a way to avoid being known. You stop testing as a way to avoid being left. Intimacy becomes a stern hospitality. I will show you my house, including the rooms I don't curate, if you will show me yours. The self does not erase difference, it blesses it with boundaries. What changes in leadership? You stop renting power from charm, fear, or mystery. You borrow it from reality, results over rhetoric. The self makes you slow to punish and slow to praise. You give people work that grows them and feedback that spares them from the blindness you paid for already. You can be decisive without pretending omniscience. Does the self stay once it arrives? Not as a constant mood. It comes and goes like weather, but it leaves infrastructure, habits, symbols, friendships, and rooms you can return to. Think of it as a treaty renewed in practice. You miss a week, you begin again. You fall into an old pattern, you repair faster. The axis holds more often than it fails. If you want one sentence to carry from this threshold, carry this. Wholeness is hospitality to what you are and courage to become what you lack. No slogan will replace the labor. But labor under the right center stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like freedom with chores. We have crossed the 7th threshold. Not a finish line, an axis. Walk back through your days with new proportion. Keep both ledgers. Guard against inflation with work, against reduction with wonder. And when the depth arrives, called or not called, let your life be shaped enough to host it without breaking. You've crossed 7 thresholds. Don't rush to summarize. Watch the next dream, the next stubborn emotion, the next unlikely alignment. Those are the places the unconscious leaves its forwarding address. This map is not for shelves, it's for daylight. Keep both ledgers, outer facts, and what visits. Honor one symbol with one honest act. Negotiate with the shadow and measure meaning by what it changes, not what it flatters. If you want the full pilgrimage, the letters, the arguments, the painted visions, watch our almost 2-hour Jung biography next. But you don't even need 2 hours to begin. Tonight, write one dream. Tomorrow, do one thing it suggests. Wholeness isn't performance. It's hospitality to what you are, and the courage to become what you lack. Walk back with new eyes.
Act on one cue within 24 hours. If it helps, come back for the long road. Auf Wiedersehen.